the stranger who spoke life into my dead dreams. Does God even see me anymore? That was the question I whispered into the silence of my tiny apartment in downtown Atlanta, the night everything inside me collapsed. My name is Naomi Carter, and this is the story of how Jesus met me in the ruins of my life, not with thunder, but with a whisper through a stranger who carried heaven in his voice. Imagine waking up every day with a weight so heavy you forget what breathing freely feels like. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, knees pulled to my chest, staring at a bottle of prescription painkillers I didn't need for pain. Not physical pain, anyway. I wasn't trying to die, I just wanted to feel nothing. I wanted silence, not from the city, but from the war inside me. I used to sing, I used to believe, I used to wake up with purpose, but now I woke up with dread. My body was tired from a chronic illness that doctors couldn't name, and my soul was tired from unanswered prayers. I hadn't sung in 3 years. I hadn't prayed in 2. I hadn't believed in 1. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. The heater rattled like it was gasping for breath, and the streetlights outside cast long shadows across my floor. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if heaven had forgotten my name. I felt like a ghost in my own life, invisible, unheard, untouched. Before the silence, there was sound. Before the sickness, there was strength. I used to wake up with melodies in my heart and lyrics pouring from my soul. I was 25, fresh out of college, leading worship at a vibrant church in Atlanta. People said I carried an anointing, that when I sang, chains broke. I believed it, I lived it. But then came the diagnosis: autoimmune, chronic, incurable. It started with fatigue, then joint pain, then the tremors. I couldn't hold a microphone without my hands shaking. I couldn't stand for more than 10 minutes without collapsing. Doctors gave me pills. Friends gave me prayers, but nothing worked. Slowly, I stopped showing up, first to rehearsals, then to church, then to life. My savings vanished in medical bills. My relationships strained under the weight of my decline. I lost my apartment and moved into a cheaper one, the one I now call my cave. I stopped singing, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My voice cracked, my breath shortened, my spirit broke. And somewhere in the middle of all that loss, I lost God. People don't talk about the loneliness that comes with invisible pain. I looked fine. I smiled when I had to. I posted old photos to pretend I was still living, but inside I was fatting. I stopped answering calls. I stopped replying to texts. I stopped going outside. My world shrank to 4 walls and a flickering lamp. I watched sermons online, hoping something would stir, but they felt like echoes in a canyon. I couldn't feel God anymore. I remember one night, lying on the floor, whispering, "If you're still there, say something." Nothing. I started journaling, not prayers, just questions. Why me? What did I do wrong? Why would you give me a gift and then take it away? I felt like Job, but without the restoration. Like David, but without the Psalms. I was a bruised reed, and I was sure God had broken me. It wasn't one moment. It was a slow descent. 1,000 tiny heartbreaks that built a mountain of despair. But there was one night that felt like the bottom. I had just gotten a rejection email from a job I desperately needed. My fridge was empty, my body ached, and my spirit was numb. I sat in the dark, clutching that bottle of pills, not to die, but to disappear. I didn't want to end my life. I just wanted to pause it, to escape it. I whispered again, "Does God even see me anymore?" And the silence was deafening. I felt forgotten, like the woman with the bleeding condition, but no crowd to press through. Like Lazarus, but no one coming to roll the stone away. I didn't want a miracle. I just wanted to know I mattered. That night, I didn't cry. I couldn't. I had cried so much over the years that my tears had dried up. I just stared at the wall, waiting for something, anything to change. And then it came. Not a voice, not a vision, just a whisper in my spirit. "Go outside." I blinked. Go outside. It was cold, late, unsafe, but the whisper came again. "Go outside." I didn't know why, but I obeyed. I threw on a hoodie, slipped into my worn-out sneakers, and walked to the park 2 blocks away. The wind bit at my skin and the streetlights cast long shadows. I felt foolish, but something inside me stirred, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Expectation. I sat on a bench near the fountain, the one that hadn't worked since summer, and that's when I saw him. A man, maybe in his 60s, walking slowly with a cane. He looked at me, paused, and sat beside me without a word. The silence between us felt strangely comfortable. I could hear my own breathing, the distant hum of traffic, the rustling of leaves. After a moment, he turned and said something that stopped my heart. "You look like someone who used to sing." I froze, my entire body went rigid. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why," he said, his eyes gentle and kind, "but I feel like God wants you to know he still hears your voice, even the silent cries." I couldn't breathe, my chest tightened, my eyes welled up, and then I broke. I wept. Right there in front of a stranger, I let years of pain pour out. He didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He just sat with me, like Jesus in the garden, watching me bleed my soul. I told him about the sickness, the silence, the songs I buried, the faith I lost. He nodded gently, then reached into his coat and handed me a small card. On it was Isaiah 42:3. "A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out." I clutched that card like it was oxygen. He didn't say much after that, just smiled, stood up, and walked away slowly, like he had all the time in the world. I sat there, stunned. That verse echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. I wasn't broken beyond repair. I wasn't forgotten. I was bruised, yes, but not discarded. I walked home from the park with the card pressed against my chest like it was keeping my heart from falling apart. Isaiah 42:3. I read it over and over again as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. "A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out." I was both bruised and smoldering, but maybe not forgotten. I sat on my bed, still in my hoodie, and stared at the card. It felt like a lifeline, not because it was magical, but because it was timely. I hadn't heard from God in years, and now he had spoken through a stranger with a cane and a quiet voice. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there whispering the verse like a lullaby. Something inside me shifted, not dramatically, not instantly, but gently, like a door creaking open after years of rust. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my journal, not to complain, not to question, but to write a song. It started as a hum, then a phrase, then a melody. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I sang through the pain, through the tremors, through the fear. "You see the bruised, you breathe on the broken." I cried as I wrote, not because I was sad, but because I was alive. I felt like Lazarus, stumbling out of the tomb, still wrapped in grave clothes but breathing again. I didn't share the song. I didn't post it. I just sang it to God, and for the first time in years, I felt him listening. That night, I went home and sang. Not loudly, not perfectly, but I sang, and heaven responded. Days passed, then weeks. I started waking up with hope, not a lot, just enough to get out of bed. I began walking to the park more often, hopping to see the stranger again. I never did, but his words echoed in my spirit. I started praying again, not long prayers, just whispers. "Thank you, help me, I'm still here." I joined an online Bible study. I didn't speak much, just listened. But every verse felt like a seed being planted in soil I thought was dead. One night, the leader read Joel 2:25. "I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten." I wept. That verse felt like it had my name on it. Something was changing inside me, not my circumstances yet, but my heart. The numbness was thawing, the silence was breaking, the hope was growing. I started keeping my curtains open during the day, letting sunlight flood my small apartment. I cleaned my kitchen. I watered the plant on my windowsill that I had neglected for months. These were small things, but they felt monumental. Each one was a declaration. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still believing. One afternoon, I picked up my guitar. It was dusty, out of tune, but still mine. I strummed a few chords, and the melody from the park came back. I sang softly, letting the words rise from the ashes of my past. You never left me in the dark. You were whispering all along. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the message. A friend from my old church had seen a clip I posted, just a 30-second snippet of the song I'd written. She messaged me, "Naomi, we're having a small worship night next week. Would you sing?" I stared at the screen. My hands trembled. My heart raced. I hadn't stood on a stage in years. I hadn't held a microphone since my diagnosis. But something in me said, "Say yes." I did. The week leading up to the worship night felt like walking through fire. Doubt screamed at me constantly. "You're not ready. You'll fail. Everyone will see how broken you are." But every time the fear rose, I touched the card in my pocket. Isaiah 42:3, a bruised reed he will not break. I practiced in my apartment, voice shaking, hands trembling, but I kept going. The night came. I wore a simple dress. My legs felt weak as I walked to the front. My voice wasn't perfect. My body still ached. But when I opened my mouth, something holy happened. The room went silent, tears flowed, and I knew this wasn't just about me. This was about resurrection. After the worship night, people came up to me, crying, hugging, thanking me. One woman said, "I've been battling cancer. Your song reminded me that God hasn't forgotten me." I went home and collapsed on my bed, overwhelmed. I whispered, "God, was that you?" And I felt it, not a voice, not a vision, just breath like wind through my soul. Peace, presence, power. I realized then, Jesus hadn't just healed my body. He had resurrected my spirit. He had breathed life into dreams I thought were buried. And he had used a stranger to do it. The morning after the worship night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the card the stranger had given me. Isaiah 42:3. I had read it so many times, the ink was starting to smudge from my fingers. But that morning, it felt different. It didn't just comfort me, it called me. I opened my journal and wrote, "If God still hears my voice, then maybe he still wants to use it." That thought echoed in my spirit all day. I couldn't shake it. I began to wonder, what if the silence I had lived in wasn't punishment, but preparation? What if the pain had carved out space for something deeper? A few days later, I returned to my old church. I hadn't stepped foot inside in over 2 years. The building looked the same, but I didn't. I walked in quietly, unsure if anyone would remember me, but they did. "Naomi, is that you? We've missed you." I smiled, but inside I trembled. I wasn't sure I belonged anymore. But then Pastor James walked up, hugged me, and said, "You've been on our hearts. We've been praying for you." I broke again, not from pain this time, from grace. During worship, I didn't sing on stage. I stood in the back, hands lifted, tears streaming. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger in God's house. I felt like a daughter coming home. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in layers. Some days I still woke up tired. Some days my body still ached, but something had shifted. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I started seeing a Christian counselor. I began walking every morning, praying out loud as I moved. I changed my diet. I took my medication faithfully. But more than anything, I worshiped. Worship became my medicine, my therapy, my warfare. One night, while singing in my room, I felt heat rush through my body. My hands stopped trembling. My breath deepened. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the presence of God. I didn't hear a voice, but I knew something had broken. From that night on, my symptoms began to fade. Slowly, gently, but undeniably. A month later, I got an email from a women's conference organizer. Someone had shared my worship night video. They wanted me to come and share my story and sing. I stared at the screen, stunned. Me, the girl who almost gave up, the one who questioned if God even saw her. I said yes. The night of the conference, I stood backstage, heart pounding. I looked out at the crowd, hundreds of women, many with tears in their eyes before I even opened my mouth. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and said, "I once believed my dreams were dead, but Jesus doesn't bury what he intends to resurrect." And then I sang, not just with my voice, with my whole soul. The room erupted in worship. Chains broke, hearts opened, and I knew this was what I was born for. After the conference, something shifted permanently. It wasn't just that I had sung again, it was that I had poured out everything I had, and God had filled me back up. I started receiving messages from women across the country, some battling illness, some grieving loss, some just tired of pretending they were okay. They said my story gave them permission to hope again. I didn't feel like a celebrity, I felt like a vessel, and for the first time I wasn't afraid of being seen. I wasn't ashamed of my scars. I wore them like testimony. I began writing songs again, not for performance but for healing. Songs that told the truth. Songs that carried the ache and the answer. Songs that reminded people, Jesus still speaks life. A few months later, I was invited to share my story on a Christian podcast. I sat in a small studio, headphones on, heart racing. The host asked, "Naomi, what would you say to someone who feels like their dreams are dead?" I paused, then I said, "I'd say what was said to me. God still hears your voice, even the silent cries, and if he gave you the dream, he hasn't forgotten it. He's just waiting for the right moment to breathe on it." The episode went viral, not because I was eloquent, but because I was honest. People are hungry for truth wrapped in grace, and that's what Jesus gave me, grace in the middle of my truth. I started a YouTube channel, not to be famous, just to be faithful. I called it Songs from the Ashes. And every week, I shared a piece of my story, a song, and a scripture that carried me through. One evening, I got a message from a young woman named Tasha. She had been battling depression and was on the verge of giving up. She said she stumbled on my video by accident, the one titled, "The Stranger Who Spoke Life into My Dead Dreams." She wrote, "I was ready to end it, but your story made me believe God still sees me. I'm still here because of it." I cried, not because I was proud, but because I was humbled. Jesus had taken my brokenness and turned it into bread for someone else. I realized then, the stranger in the park wasn't just a messenger for me. He was a spark that lit a fire meant to warm others. My channel grew slowly but steadily, not millions of followers, but the right followers, people who needed hope, people who felt forgotten, people like me. One night I sat in my room, guitar in hand, journal open. I looked back at the pages, the pain, the prayers, the silence, the songs. And I saw a pattern, a thread, a story. God hadn't just healed me, he had rewritten me. I used to think my calling was to sing, but now I knew my calling was to testify, to be a living witness that Jesus still walks into broken places, that he still speaks through strangers, that he still resurrects what we bury in grief. I wrote in my journal, my dreams weren't dead, they were waiting for resurrection. And I knew this was the message I was born to carry. I began speaking at churches, small groups, conferences. Each time I shared my story, I watched faces change. I watched walls come down. I watched hope rise. One woman approached me after a service and said, "I've been in ministry for 20 years, but I forgot why. Your story reminded me that it's not about perfection, it's about presence." Another young woman, barely 20, told me she had been ready to walk away from her faith entirely. But hearing how God met you in the dark made me believe he could meet me too. These moments became my fuel. They reminded me that my pain had purpose, that my story could be a bridge for someone else. I also reconnected with old friends from my worship days. Some were shocked by my transformation. Others admitted they had wondered where I went but didn't know how to reach out. One friend, Michelle, confessed, "I saw you pulling away, but I didn't want to intrude. I should have fought harder for you." I hugged her and said, "You prayed, that was enough. God used every prayer, even the silent ones." We cried together, and our friendship was restored, deeper than before, built on honesty instead of performance. I learned something powerful during this season. Community isn't about being strong together. It's about being real together. And when we're real, healing flows. 6 months after the park encounter, I returned to that same bench. I sat there, holding the card, remembering the stranger's words. I never saw him again. I don't know his name. I don't know his story, but I know he was sent. Maybe he was an angel. Maybe he was just a faithful man who listened to God. Either way, he changed my life. I whispered into the wind, "Thank you. Whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you." And then I sang. Right there in the park, I sang the song I had written that first night. People walked by, some stopped to listen, some smiled. One elderly woman paused, tears in her eyes, and said, "That's beautiful. Don't ever stop singing." I won't. That night, I received an email from a major Christian music label. They had heard about my story and wanted to meet. They were interested in producing an album. I stared at the screen, overwhelmed. This was beyond anything I had imagined. But I also knew this wasn't about fame. It was about faithfulness. I prayed before responding. "God, if this is you, let it bring glory to your name. If it's not, close the door." 2 weeks later, I met with the label. They were kind, professional, and genuinely moved by my story. They offered me a contract, not a huge one, but enough to record my songs and share them with a wider audience. I signed it, hands shaking, heart full. But before I did, I made one request. I want to give 10% of everything to ministries that help people with chronic illness, and I want my story told honestly, pain and all. They agreed. Over the next year, I recorded my first album. It was called Bruised but Breathing. Every song was a piece of my journey, the pain, the doubt, the silence, and the resurrection. When it released, it didn't top the charts, but it touched hearts, and that was enough. I received letters from people all over the world. Some were battling illness, some were grieving, some were just tired of pretending. They all said the same thing. "Thank you for being honest. You gave me hope." One letter came from a woman in her 70s. She wrote, "I've been a Christian for 50 years, but I've been secretly angry at God for 10. Your song, Even in the Silence, helped me finally tell him the truth, and he met me there." I wept when I read it, because that's what this was all about, helping people encounter Jesus in their mess. My health continued to improve. Not completely, I still have hard days, but the chronic fatigue lessened. The tremors became rare, my voice grew stronger. Doctors were baffled, they couldn't explain it medically, but I could, it was grace. One doctor said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I smiled and said, "I'm worshiping." I also started a small nonprofit called Speak Life. It provides resources for people battling chronic illness, everything from medical bill assistance to prayer support to worship playlists. It started small, just me and a few volunteers, but it grew. People donated, churches partnered, lives were changed. And every time someone told me their story of healing or hope, I thought of the stranger in the park. He spoke life into my dead dreams, and now I get to do the same for others. One evening, I was invited to speak at a youth conference. I almost said no. My story felt too heavy for teenagers. But then I remembered. I was 25 when my life fell apart. They needed to hear this. I stood before hundreds of young people and said, "Some of you are already battling things adults don't even know about. Some of you feel forgotten. Some of you think your dreams are dead. I'm here to tell you God sees you, and He's not done with your story." The altar call that night was overwhelming. Dozens of teenagers came forward, weeping, surrendering, believing again. One girl, maybe 16, hugged me and said, "I was going to quit music, but now I know God still wants to use it." I held her and whispered, "Don't quit, the world needs your song." That night, I realized my ministry wasn't just to the broken. It was to the dreamers who were afraid to dream again. As I drove home, I thought about everything that had happened since that cold night in the park. The stranger, the card, the song, the healing, the ministry, the lives touched. None of it made sense, except through the lens of grace. I had been a bruised reed, a smoldering wick, and Jesus didn't break me or snuff me out. He gently, patiently, lovingly restored me. And now, I get to tell that story over and over again. I pulled into my apartment complex. the same one I had lived in during my darkest days. But it didn't feel dark anymore. It felt like the place where resurrection began. I walked to my door, humming the melody that started everything, and I whispered, "Thank you, Jesus, for never giving up on me." As I unlocked my door, I noticed something on my doorstep, a small envelope, no name, no return address. My heart skipped. I opened it slowly. Inside was a card, and on it, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was Isaiah 42:3. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Tears streamed down my face. I looked around, but no one was there. Was it the stranger? Had he come back? Or was it someone else? Someone whose life had been touched by my story, now passing the blessing forward? I didn't know, and maybe I wasn't supposed to. Maybe that's how grace works. It circles back, it multiplies, it keeps moving. I placed the new card beside the old one on my nightstand. 2 reminders that God never stops speaking life. That night, I wrote in my journal, I thought my dreams were dead, but they were just sleeping, waiting for the breath of God to wake them up. And when he breathed, everything changed. I closed the journal and picked up my guitar. I played softly, singing a new song, one about gratitude, restoration, and the faithfulness of a God who meets us in the dark. As I sang, I felt that familiar warmth again, that presence, that peace. And I knew this was just the beginning. So here I am, Naomi Carter, once broken, now breathing, once silent, now singing, once lost, now found. If you're reading this, I want you to know your story isn't over, your pain isn't wasted, your silence isn't ignored. Jesus still speaks life, he still heals, he still restores. And sometimes, he sends strangers to remind you. Maybe you're the one sitting in the dark right now, wondering if God sees you. He does. He's closer than you think. Maybe you're the one with dead dreams, buried under pain and doubt. They're not dead. They're waiting for resurrection. Or maybe you're the stranger, the one God is calling to speak life into someone else's darkness. Don't ignore that nudge. You might be someone's turning point. I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten. Joel 2:25. He makes all things new. Revelation 21:5. This is my testimony. This is my song. And if it encouraged you, share your story too. Let someone know they're not alone. Because Jesus is still working wonders today. And your miracle might be closer than you think.